Hello there, and welcome to Fable TLC Cut Content, the series that tries to show you as much content that goes unused relating to Fable to help give you some idea of how different the game could have been. This includes things like weapons, spells, NPCs, creatures, food, potions, augmentations, hero titles, and many more. If this sounds interesting to you, then a link to my playlist on the project can be found in the video description, along with a link to a mod known as the Content Museum, which you are looking at right now, where I try to make some of these things available for other people to play. So if you want to try some of these out for yourself and don't want to spend the time spawning or rigging everything, then this mod has you covered. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at all of the data I could find relating to the Dragon boss fight quest, specifically the version of it that was cut from the game just before Fable's original release on the Xbox back in 2004. If you for some reason haven't played through Fable The Lost Chapters or Fable Anniversary yet, then consider this a spoiler warning, as I will need to briefly go over how that part of the story plays out. After defeating Jack of Blades for the first time, you are warned by Scythe about the Summoners. He suggests that you open the ancient demon door and obtain the Fire Heart from the prophets that are trapped there.
The strongest among you must open the primal demon door close to this body. It holds the Fire Heart.
This is to call upon the Ship of the Drowned and allow you access to the Northern Wastes.
Well, here's your ride. Looks, cozy.
Upon arriving at the Northern Wastes, Scythe continues to explain that the Wake of the Summoners are a result of a strong force that lies beyond the Bronze Gate. After collecting 3 of the respective hero souls and using them to power Archon's shrine, you manage to open the Bronze Gate and find out that it is in fact Jack, only this time he is returned with the form of a dragon.
Here you are. It's been a long wait, but I knew you'd free me eventually. Yes, always the puppet. Don't you ever get tired of having your strings pulled. I am no mortal man. The gods and demons you fear and worship are as nothing to me.
Since I just explained to you how the story is meant to work in the retail game, let's take a look at evidence that can be found in the retail game relating to this quest. If you use a program like Fable Explorer or Chocolabox to view the game files for Fable The Lost Chapters and then take a look around in different parts of the game's data, you'll stumble upon a whole bunch of assets related to this quest. You have all the stuff that you would typically expect, like animations, meshes, and textures for architecture relating to Archon's Folly and Jack's dragon form. However, there is a lot more hidden away in plain sight that goes completely unused, such as architecture, textures, and text entries for an area that hardly even resembles the atmosphere of Archon's Folly. I imagine for a lot of people, these assets were probably the first step of finding out about the cut content relating to this dragon boss fight quest. So let's start off really basic and work our way up based on how the information is presented to us. This means that it would make sense to find any information we can about Jack's dragon boss fight first, since it is the most familiar to us. This will also help when comparing between the cut version of the quest later on. Now, I don't think this is related to the quest per se, however, it is assumed to be an unused asset, therefore I have to put it in here. This is an object which can be found in the game files that is very similar to Jack's dragon form. The strange part about it being that it appears to use a texture that resembles a flame augmentation. This model is referred to as Dragon Scale Test. Perhaps it was a way for the developers to test the visual fidelity of the dragon model, specifically the scales and armour that surrounds Jack's body. But really, as someone with zero experience in game design, I have no idea how this object was meant to help the developers with this task, or why they decided to leave it in the game to begin with, if it no longer serves a purpose. If you use a program like Fable Explorer or Chocolate to view the game files for Fable The Lost Chapters, and then open up the text.big that can be found listed there, you will find every text file entry that can be found in the game. The text.big is responsible for all the dialogue you would hear in cutscenes, object names, object descriptions, and even text for parts of the game's user interfaces. By typing in the keyword dragon with the program's search feature, we can find a variety of entries that are related to this quest. The first thing you will probably notice is how it says there is a region named Dragon Cliff that is actually used for Archon's Folly, which is the map that you fight Jack as a dragon. Alongside this are a series of dialogue entries related to the introduction cinematic involving Jack's dragon form while he is speaking to you. There are obviously the ones you would expect that are used in the game, like "Here you are," "Yes, always the puppet," and so on. However, there are a couple more that go unused or were changed, which help insinuate that this introduction dialogue with Jack was meant to be even longer. The lines amongst these which specifically go unused are Dragon Intro 50, Dragon Intro 60, and Dragon Intro 70. Dragon Intro 50 is actually used in the game, although it was shortened and given the name Dragon Intro 50B instead. So now that you know what these lines are about and how they might be related to this quest, here is how they might have sounded if they were all put together in the same cutscene.
Here you are. So glad you could make it to the end of your little adventure. It's been a long wait, but I knew you'd free me eventually. Yes, always the puppet. Don't you ever get tired of having your strings pulled? And did you really think you could kill me? I am no mortal man. The gods and demons you fear and worship are as nothing to me. All you did was release me from a body I had grown weary of. Would you like to see my new face?
There also appears to be this weirdly placed light that can be found in the Heroes Guild map room, which only appears during the dragon boss fight quest, but here is how it is supposed to look like. It doesn't seem very effective, but perhaps it was used to point out something during a dark cutscene or environment, similar to what happens in Jack of Blade's humanoid form. Now that you are fully aware that even the dragon fight that we got in the final game was meant to play out differently, I should really explain where the problem actually lies. In the same text.big file that I mentioned earlier, which are on the disk of Fable TLC, can be found numerous lines of text which contradict how the quest plays out in the final game. For starters, the quest title was originally meant to be called Dragon Boss Fight and not The Final Battle, with the summary reading Face the Mighty Dragon in Combat. There's also a line of text by the Guildmaster for the dragon fight that goes unused, which simply states, "Take on a mighty dragon." However, it appears that the file that the audio is drawn from has been removed, so there's no way to play it or export it, even with a version of ShadowNet that works with sound. On top of this, there is also text associated with a Dragon Skill trophy that can still be found in the game files and goes completely unused. If you put all of this information together, then clearly the dragon boss fight that we got in the final game was not the way it was intended. Before we go back to the files that can be found on Fable TLC, we should take a look at information found outside of the game as well, most notably the Fable TLC and Fable Anniversary Prima guides. Unfortunately, I currently do not own a copy of the Anniversary one myself, since they are usually going for stupid amounts of money nowadays. However, a digital copy of the full TLC version of the Prima guide is easily available online. Naturally, we will start off with this TLC Prima guide, any references relating to this quest, and then I will explain why the Anniversary Prima guide is relevant later. From what I can tell, this version of the Prima guide doesn't really go in depth about any cut content really. It's more of a guide to help people understand how aspects of the game and certain quests work. However, we do have a dragon that is shown in fresco art, which doesn't show up in the original game. I'm not too sure why they didn't just use Jack's dragon fresco art, or just any other fresco art for continuity's sake, but hey, whatever floats your boat. If anything, it probably helped promote cut content, as I imagine anyone after reading this would want to go out and find out why there is a totally different dragon to Jack. The fresco art shown here can still be found in the game files though, and looks exactly like the one for Jack's dragon form. However, it is clearly a totally different dragon. This one doesn't even have horns protruding from its head, since the fresco art for Jack's dragon form was made later on in the game's development. It is ironically more harder to find amongst the game files compared to this one that goes unused. Here is how the unused fresco art looks when implemented into the game. As you can tell, this dragon has a totally different colour scheme and anatomy when compared to the one that is used for Jack of Blades. This is an old Fable presentation from 2003 called the GiGa Presentation, in which Peter Molyneux and Simon Carter had the opportunity to show off and promote the game to a German audience. It's a really lengthy presentation, so if you want to watch the whole thing, then a link will be found in the video description. But for this video, there is a specific part I would like to briefly show.
Learn the word to say the word. Shit. And so he chose to learn that.
Yeah.
You don't have to learn that. So now he can just swear at anybody he likes in the world. He can walk around and swear.
So let's point that out. You walk around, you see somebody swearing at his children or something like that, and
You learn that.
call them really bad names. Like,
Yes.
I mean, you can say fuck on German TV. That's
You can.
that's a nice thing because nobody understands it.
Right, okay.
You can say fuck or mother, whatever.
But-
So you can really, by seeing it, you can learn it.
You can learn it, and also it's got a little bit of expression on it. So because you can put it on these keys, on these keys here.
On the D-pad.
If you press it, you can go shit. So when we're playing cooperative, quite often we walk down as a band and we go shit, motherfucker, shit, and we're just sort of rapping, doing our own rap. And you walk into a town like that, and people rap. Anyway, that's just a trivial thing. Let's have a look a bit more of a
That's a nice detail.
It's just. Yeah, I think it's really funny, especially when you walk in and you see this huge dragon, and all three of us go shit, and that is just as
Holy moly!
Yeah. Now,
It's possible that this was just Peter joking around trying to explain his point. However, it's also possible that this was a slip of the tongue by Peter, mentioning a feature that was even being worked on all the way back then, but ended up being scrapped from Fable for the original Xbox back in 2004. Now if you were to look in the game's textures.big section instead of the text one and search for the keyword of dragon, then you will stumble upon a selection of textures that go completely unused. The first is a standalone texture that goes unused, which merely uses the name Dragon Head 1, and at first glance it doesn't really look like much of anything, maybe a mouth and an eyeball. From what I can tell, this isn't supposed to be applied to anything that can be found in the game, nor is there any textures that are associated with it. So whatever this was for was completely scrapped, and this is all that's left of it. However, Lionbum, who is a level designer for Fable 2 and 3, that originally started his role in Lionhead Studios as a QA tester for the original Fable and goes by the name of Charlie Edwards, was nice enough to post various images and screenshots that he found relating to cut content and general development for Fable. Amongst these was a screenshot that is believed to be the devs team's first attempt at getting a dragon into the game world, which should support the idea that this dragon texture that can be found on the disc for Fable The Lost Chapters is the last remnants of this original dragon. According to Charlie, the dragon didn't even have animations yet and was simply a mesh with a creature entry, both of which were scrapped from Fable TLC's game files. So now that you know another dragon other than Jack was definitely planned for the game at one point in development based on the evidence provided so far, let's go over the Fable Anniversary Prima guide that I mentioned earlier. Like I said before, I don't actually own a copy of this guide, but a user by the name of Game Genie was generous enough to spend the time taking some screenshots of his guide and provided me with what information I needed to make this part of the video. Unlike the Fable TLC Prima guide, this one actually talks about cut content and plans that the developers had for the game, but ultimately had to pull from the final release of Fable for the Xbox. So with that out the way, I thought it would be a great time to share some concept art relating to the game that can also be found in the Fable Anniversary Prima guide, specifically the ones about dragons. There are 4 specific dragons that are presented here, and each in a way determine the different stage in Fable's development. The top one, for example, was clearly something that only got to the concept phase. This was most likely the original vision for Fable's dragon. It looks a lot more gigantic and over the top in design when compared to any of the other concept art that we are familiar with. We'll call this brute Dragon A. Then there is one at the bottom of the page that seems very bizarre. This dragon appears to be a strange mix between a serpent and a bird. Not only that, but for some reason it has a whole bunch of tendrils just spouting from its stomach. From what I can tell, it doesn't have eyes either. We'll call this interesting fellow Dragon B. Above that, we have two dragons facing away from each other. The one on the right appears to be the concept art for the dragon that Lionbum posted, if I'm not mistaken. It has a hairy back, awkwardly shaped horns, and two large wings which support it when it's on the ground. We'll call this thing Dragon C. And finally, there is the dragon which is shown on the left of Dragon C. This seems to resemble the dragon that was shown in the Dragon Fresco art that goes unused in the final game. We'll name this guy Dragon D for the time being. Now, I plan to cover as much as I can find for each of these dragons, but before I do that, there is probably something I should make abundantly clear. Not only is there various dragons that clearly went through different stages, but the quest itself went through various stages during the game's development. This is made more apparent by a response from one of the co-creators of Fable called Dene, who goes by the username Fluttermind, which is the name of his new studio.
My name is Dene Carter. I'm the managing director of Fluttermind LLC, at Fluttermind, imaginatively. And I've had the genuine pleasure of being in this industry professionally for 33 years.
Also, you've got to love the moustache he is rocking here. It bears a striking resemblance to the trader moustache from Fable. Anyways, on his Fluttermind Discord server, he has a channel dedicated to people asking him about information relating to Fable. When asked in the same channel about evidence left in the game for a different dragon that was intended earlier on in the game's development, Dene responded saying the following: "As for a dragon, doing that kind of thing, well, takes several people, several weeks, and we were all crunching 6 days a week for at least 14 hours a day. A dragon was something we planned, but time slipped away, and he went from core story to possible secret, a stupid idea, to dropped fairly rapidly. In addition, numerous quests and will abilities were dropped, again, because polishing each feature and checking it doesn't break some aspect of the game takes time." Based off this description given by Dene, it sounds to me like the way things worked were like this. There was meant to be a dragon intended for Fable's storyline. How it would have tied to the storyline specifically is uncertain though, but clearly its intention was to be some form of late game boss. They eventually tried to shorten the dragon quest to save some more time. It's possible during this process they still tried making a smaller version of the same quest, but ultimately the dragon boss fight was restricted to a secret that you could find in the game, sort of like a side mission. After they realised that even this idea was becoming too much for them to finish in time for Fable's release, they scrapped the concept of a dragon altogether in Fable for the original Xbox in 2004. This concept was then reborn again 1 year later with the release of Fable The Lost Chapters, only it was changed to fit the current storyline. This meant that having the dragon possessed by Jack of Blades made more sense than just a random dragon that you would find around Albion. Now that all those pesky details are out the way, you might be asking yourself, well, is there any more information related to these different stages shown in the anniversary concept art? For some of them, there definitely is more to show, but for others, not so much. So let's start off with Dragon A so you can see what I mean. Like I said before, it feels like Dragon A was more of a concept stage and nothing else really came out of this particular dragon design, or at least I can't seem to find any more artwork related to this one. If you don't know what that means, it basically means that this sketch was probably the original idea that the lead designers and artists had for the dragon and how they would envision it in the game. However, concept art is not always completely implemented into a game the way the developers imagine it. It's merely a way of expressing a certain feel that they want from that idea or concept, and in a lot of cases are usually the result of the people who direct the game asking the artists to show what they can make based on those concepts. Although some people like to stay as true to the concept art as they can, and sometimes because of the way game development works, I mean it's a whole process of learning, these ideas change, grow bigger, get smaller, evolve, and that's why in a lot of cases you see cool ideas like this, but you never ever actually see it in the game. With all that being said, a user named Albion Secrets, who is another modder for Fable, noticed similarities in certain aspects of the game's lore that could have been inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. This made him want to ask Dene himself about whether or not these comparisons were true. If you aren't familiar with who Howard Phillips Lovecraft was, he basically was an American writer that was born in 1890 and had a love for both reading and writing books or novels based on genres such as weird fiction, horror fiction, science fiction, gothic fiction, and even fantasy. Although he never got the recognition he deserved in his lifetime as an author, his works would later become a major influence for future writers on such genres. His work and philosophy on writing was so inspirational that it became its own subgenre called Lovecraftian horror. There's your English lesson for the day. Dene did end up responding to Albion Secrets about these comparisons, stating that H.P. Lovecraft's work was a big inspiration for many aspects of Fable's lore, along with another novelist called Clive Barker, who also had an interest in stories in the horror and fantasy genres. If you would like to see more comparisons and how their work could have helped influence the atmosphere and storytelling in Fable, then I highly recommend checking out the Fable Ask Me Anything channel on Dean Carter's Fluttermind Discord server. The reason I bring all of this up though is that me and Albion Secrets share the same feeling that this early concept of the dragon is very overtop in its design, with far too many spikes, spines, horns and nipples. It appears to be really gigantic or have some form of supernatural strength and would have tried to bring about the end of the world, similar to something you would expect from H.P. Lovecraft's work for example. Even down to the unique stylistic choice of the scales and the wings really helps cement this possibility. Unfortunately though, despite how epic it looks in scope, there's no way a dragon like this would have fit the world of Fable, but perhaps that's just my opinion. I would like to say that this design was probably being considered sometime around the late 90s up to 2000, while the game itself was still in its concept phase. Dragon B is also a similar situation to Dragon A in that there is not a whole lot of information surrounding this stage of its development, which means that, as far as we are aware, this design probably also never got past the concept phase. We do have another concept art that appears to look like this dragon, although the face is completely different to the one shown in the Anniversary Prima guide, and since it only shows the upper part of the dragon, we can't determine how many tendrils it had, if any. To me, it looks like it appears to only have 2 wings and a tail from this angle. It's possible that this design in particular ended up being a later version of the one we call Dragon B, as they both bear similar colour scheme and anatomy. Unfortunately, there is no evidence in any version of the game that seems like it could relate to this dragon either, making this stage of its development almost a mystery to people in the community. If I had to guess, I would say this concept art was probably conceived around 2001 and 2002. It appears it had a lot of thought put into it, but based on the lack of evidence to support it, odds are this concept was scrapped very early. Dragon C, on the other hand, we already established looks very similar to an image that Lionbum had posted to Reddit. It has lots of spikes, a hairy back, and 2 large wings that supports it from the front. It's possible the design was slightly changed when translating the concept art to a 3D model, but this at least proves to us that this version of the creature got developed to a point where it was actually implemented into the game, albeit with no animations or flashy effects. The texture I mentioned earlier, called Dragonhead 01, also appears to be the only evidence left of this model, so there is no real way for us to restore it back into the game, since we lack all of the other necessary assets, like a model, animations, the rest of its textures, its creature entry, and any of the other data that the developers use to rig these dragons when they are in the game. Like Dene said before, it takes a lot of work to make one of these bad boys. It's possible that an even earlier build of the game could contain these assets, but as far as I'm aware, no more of its data can be found in either Fable TLC or Fable for the Xbox. The extra concept art that I had shown earlier for Dragon B could have also been a halfway point between these 2 dragons, which could help confirm that this version of said dragon was from a later period in the game's development. I would like to say around 2002, 2003, based off Lionbum's screenshot. So what about the final concept art shown here, Dragon D? Surely one of these dragons has to have something left of it. Well, you're in luck, as this dragon has plenty more concept art associated with it. In fact, this was probably the most fleshed out dragon form that even ended up getting models rendered for it. If you would like to see more of it for yourself, then I highly recommend checking out its creators, Damien Bozugby, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, but his ArtStation page where he shows how much of the work he did for the original Fable, including this unused dragon. Apparently, he was responsible for a lot of Fable's style, especially in regards to its characters, so it would explain why they gave him the task to make such a Goliath of a dragon.
If they end up with a game with a skinny, pale, horned, evil character, that's how they played the game. If they end up with this buff, sun-tanned, huge Goliath of a player, that's how they played the game.
Here is Damien's concept art for the dragon. Along with this image that was found by Item that looks like the dragon actually working in the game. There's also this image that was archived by the Fable historian, which shows those buildings I showed earlier that look totally different to Archon's Folly. Based on this evidence, we can easily speculate that this stage of the dragon's development was meant to be the final stage. Plenty of concept art proves this, and we even have an image showing us that enough time and effort went into it so that it would react to its environment, unlike Dragon C, meaning that this dragon was most likely being worked on between 2003 and 2004, just before the original game's release on the Xbox. However, we aren't done with this beast yet. So, before I go over more about what can be found on Dragon D, I would just like to clear up a common misconception about it. For years, a lot of people assumed this dragon was named Kyris, myself included. This is because of a line of dialogue that goes unused in the arena, in which the announcer states that someone was responsible for the slaying of Kyris the Dragon. The audio is still available for the dialogue too.
A legend! A mask from the past! He's been arena champion 7 years running! He was responsible for the slaughter of Ishmar! The torching of the White Lodge! And the slaying of Kyris the Dragon!
Based on the naming convention of the text files and the audio that follows the one I just mentioned, it's believed that this line of text was actually introducing Jack of Blades as the slayer of Kyris the Dragon, and not the hero of Oakvale. So just in case you were confused like I was, now you know that the dragon we were meant to face was never meant to be called Kyris, although I have to admit that name does sound way cooler than what it actually ended up being called, but more on that later. Now then, what about evidence that can be found in the game for this dragon? Well, if you use the method I mentioned earlier, which is to go into the game's texture.big section and search for the keyword dragon, you will find a series of textures meant for a creature that is simply named Dragon 02, which can still be found in the game files. It has an eye, wing, head, legs, torso, and glow texture associated with it. The dragon appears to bear similar resemblance in terms of colour to the Dragon Skill trophy and the Unused Dragon Fresco Art that I showed off earlier. Based off the concept art I showed as well, we can confirm that Dragon D was given the name Dragon 02 in the game files, and that this dragon was so close to being finished that it even had its own textures, model, animations, fresco art, and even a trophy to boot, meaning that Lionbum's screenshot of a dragon was most likely Dragon 01, since it was their first attempt at implementing a dragon into the game world. There's also a whole bunch of thing entries, which are usually used for making projectiles in the game. However, there is not only a series of dragon entries that clearly state they are for Jack, but more that can be found underneath them which just states dragon. Based on Lionbum saying that Dragon 01 never had animations implemented for it, it is most likely that these were also meant for Dragon 02. Unfortunately, no mesh or creature entry can be found for Dragon 02 in the game files of Fable TLC. That being said, if we were to view the game files for the original Fable, then we have a completely different story. For starters, there is a map in this version of the game that is named the same as Archon's Folly in the game files, and the text entries involved with that map state its name was indeed meant to be Dragon Cliff, as the entry name alluded to in the TLC version. Not only that, but the assets which were intended for Dragon 02 can also be found here. We're talking its textures, mesh, animations, and even a creature entry that we can use to spawn it into the game. I mean, they even made so many animations that the footage for it took me about 30 minutes or so to record, so that's saying a lot for how far this dragon was actually developed. So in case you are interested, here is footage I managed to record showcasing them all. You can skip ahead if this isn't something you are fascinated by. But before you do, allow me to just mention that similar to Jack's dragon form, Creature Dragon 02 also has animations for landing, setting off, flying, hovering, and even breathing fire down upon its enemies. I am unsure if they were meant for a cutscene or if the dragon would just die in a scripted sequence, but it also has a plummet to death animation. Not all of these animations look like they work or were finished though, so really it's a case of taking what you can get at this point. This sounds great, right? Just rip all of those assets from the Xbox version and then spawn it into the game yourself. Well, even if you do that, you aren't going to get the result you expected. You see, while we do now have all of its assets which are present in the game, there still appears to be something we are missing that actually tells the dragon to react to its environment. My guess is that because the dragon was meant to be used for this one instance in the game, it was most likely a scripted sequence that required some kind of script or reference in the game's executable file in order to, well, execute. But still, knowing that we have the assets available to us is very damning evidence of this dragon's existence and shows us how far the developers got before it was ultimately scrapped. Oh, and before you ask with what I'm about to mention now, spawning the dragon in Dragon Cliff does not work either. Whatever triggers it to react to its environment is currently not present in any version of the game. This is why a lot of modders have resorted to swapping out Jack's data for this one instead, although this also has its own problems, as I will get into later. So, now that we've went over all the information we can find relating to the dragon forms that were shown in the Anniversary Prima guide, what about Dragon Cliff? The map which I mentioned earlier, which was referenced in the Xbox version's text.big file. The assets which were available in TLC, that seem like they possess a different atmosphere to the objects that can be found in Archon's Folly, are also present in this version of the game as well, which means that we know all of these assets labelled as Dragon Quest in the game files were meant for a map known as Dragon Cliff. The actual Dragon Cliff map is still present in the Xbox version of the game too, and opening it up with a text file will reveal that this is true. And although the map never explicitly states that Creature Dragon or 2 was meant to spawn here, I think we can put 2 and 2 together, considering both of these were removed from Fable TLC's game files and ended up being recycled for Jack's boss fight instead. So what does the map look like, you might be asking yourself? Those of you who have been observant enough will have noticed a map in the part of the video where I showed off Dragon or 2's animations, which isn't in the final game. Yes, you guessed it. This is, in fact, Dragon Cliff. Using a modded Xbox to access the map, or by recompiling the game's STB file while including this map in your game files, we can actually restore this map and view it for ourselves. If you didn't know, the game's STB file is responsible for the terrain that the game produces, which is one big mesh that is cut up into chunks for each level. You can actually see this for yourself if you delete the file from your game's level folder, which results in no terrain and won't actually break the game upon doing so. Although you might find navigation a bit more tedious if you decide to do that, so I wouldn't recommend it unless you know what you're doing. Anyways, for those of you interested, I present to you the fabled Dragon Cliff. Now, if you've seen this map before, then it might not seem so exciting, but some things to consider about this map is how closely it resembles Archon's Folly, even down to the minimap that was used. There's even a filler area for this map that is named Dragon Cliff Filler, and entering the map will reveal that it's just a strip of snowy land. However, the Dragon Cliff map itself never actually calls for it, so perhaps this was from a leftover version of the map, or some way for them to make it seem like the dragon would be a part of a map, like Hook Coast or the Northern Wastes. Not only that, but only some of the assets which were present in the game files for the Dragon Quest are actually used for this map. There's no bridge or gateway, for example. It also appears that Dragon Cliff was meant to have a demon door entrance associated with it, since a demon door wall can be found at the back of the map. This would make sense as an unused demon door can be found in the game files that uses the script names DD Dragon and DF Dragon. This demon door has a whole bunch of voice lines that go unused, which state that it awaits a hero with high renown. Because of this unique requirement, they made voice lines based on various stages of your renown.
Oh please, as if I'd let a dribble of pus like you come through. If you knew what was behind this door, then you'd know I'm doing you a favor. Only a combatant of the highest renown has a chance against it. So come back when you think you're hard enough. I'm not opening until I think you can deal with this. You got a lot of chickens to chase before that time. Only geezers with high renown can come through. Stop taking the mickey. I'm not talking about your average sword-clattering scrope, you know. It's you. Your renown has spread. But beware, you have never faced a challenge like this. Seriously. I have contained this threat for 1,000 years. It could kill you where you stand. You may pass. Get it?
Since there's nothing else in the game that uses it, this shows us that at one point in development, the requirement to enter Dragon Cliff was most likely a high renown. Perhaps this demon door requirement is what Dean Carter meant when he said that the dragon was turned into a side mission later on in the game's development. If you've ever played Fable on the original Xbox, then you might be familiar with a certain demon door outside of the Heroes Guild which can't be accessed whatsoever. Considering all of this content relating to the demon door and the dragon can be found in the Xbox version of the game as well, and that this happens to be the only demon door in that version of the game which doesn't open, it leads us to assume that perhaps the dragon demon door was meant to be found here, which would make sense when you consider that its requirement is renown and that you would really only get a chance to experience its dialogue for no renown had this been the case. It's possible that at some point, earlier on in the game's development, the Demon Door was also planned to be in Hook Coast, since there is more evidence of the quest being associated with that map, but the idea that they reused this door for Fable the Lost Chapter's storyline could be a nod to this earlier concept that was scrapped. If we go back to the Fable Anniversary Prima guide for a moment, we can actually find various artwork relating to Hook Coast, a lot of it showing us that it was meant to have buildings and structures towering above it. Some even look like they are resting on hilltops. It appears the map's design was conceived differently as well. For starters, in this concept art, there is no snow at all, although that could have been intentional to show the structure of the town more clearly. But on top of this, the order in which you were meant to find everything was also considerably different. For example, the lighthouse is at the other end of the map and not at the start like it is in the retail game, while the port for its boats was meant to be held in the middle of the town. It appears to be much wider too. There's also this neat concept art for the necropolis which can be found underneath it. I'm guessing these two concept art pieces are so close together because in the original game, their intention was to allow you to get a boat to gain access to the necropolis and stop Jack from receiving the Sword of Aeons. But this whole section was cut and reworked for the Lost Chapter's storyline. A concept art I find particularly interesting though is this one. It's possible this could be some kind of very early version of the Hook Coast Lighthouse. But to me, it seems like it bears a striking resemblance to the Dragon Quest defences that can be found in the game files, only it isn't completely destroyed like these ones are. Another thing to consider in regards to the Fable Anniversary Prima guide is that there's pages dedicated to how the game's map was intended to play out before it was shortened significantly. It's unclear which era of development all of this was meant to be, but if I had to guess it was most likely some transition between Project Ego and a very early version of Fable. Among these maps is one featuring Hook Coast. What's strange about it though is how it names a map very closely linked to Hook Coast that is called Dragon's Lair, which sounds like it could have been a reference to a certain game, but still, it's really strange that there is no mention of Dragon Cliff anywhere in the Anniversary Prima guide, and there is no mention of Dragon's Lair in any of the game files. This leads us to assume that Dragon's Lair was either a very early version of Dragon Cliff, or a very early concept in general for Dragon Cliff. Remember earlier how I said that Dene helped clarify the timeline for the Dragon Quest's development? Now I could be wrong about this, but to me it feels like the Dragon's Lair, which is referenced here, played more of the quest role rather than just being an earlier version of Dragon Cliff specifically. This would make sense considering how much the Dragon Quest was changed during development and why there still remains Dragon Cliff type assets that aren't even used in Dragon Cliff itself. This could also help explain why no further references can be found for the Dragon's Lair area in particular, since Dragon Cliff ended up preceding it. Another part of the Fable Anniversary Guide explains certain ideas and atmospheres that the developers intended for different areas in the game. For example, the graveyard is meant to have a creepy, suspenseful, and ghostly atmosphere to help give an uneasy feel to the environment you're playing in. What's interesting is the sections which mention Hook Coast, most notably a map which is listed as Castle and is said to bear a similar atmosphere to Hook Coast. Perhaps that is what this particular concept art was alluding to. If we check out even more concept art in the Fable Anniversary Prima guide, we'll find a particular piece that really helps confirm this idea that Castle was actually intended to be a very early version of Dragon Cliff. This is an image of a dragon's tail hovering above what appears to be a destroyed castle, with a will user casting lightning at the dragon from below. The assets for the castle bear striking resemblance to assets which can be found in Dragon Cliff, most notably this tower that I am guessing the hero of Oakvale is standing on top of. To my knowledge, there is or was no other castles planned in the original Fable. So based on how well all of this ties together, it's not too much of a stretch to assume that Dragon's Lair was this castle that the Prima guide references and was intended to play more of a role in the game's story before it was made even smaller and renamed to Dragon Cliff. Another interesting thing I noticed is that the dragon's tail is green and spiky, which seems to resemble Creature Dragon 02 more than any of the other concept art we have seen so far. However, bear in mind that this doesn't mean that Dragon's Lair was the original idea for the dragon either, like the Dragon Quest for example. In the same Anniversary Prima guide, there is a page dedicated to the dragon, which the developers used to explain what the original goal for him was all along. It's technically 2 pages, but to help provide you with as much context as possible, I will just read out the whole thing. Despite the heavy workload, Big Blue Box still refused to skip on ambition, though inevitably some of the studio's grander ideas fell by the wayside. Fable's seamless open world, for instance, quickly became a design nightmare as the game's complexity grew. Eventually, Albion was hacked into discrete regions to better suit the limitations of the original Xbox hardware. For a long time too, trolls roamed freely across Albion instead of being rooted to the spot. They looked amazing, notes Fable Anniversary's lead designer Ted Timmons, but ultimately we had to make them static as they broke too many things by stomping around. Meanwhile, other ideas were dropped, not for technical reasons, but because, astonishingly, they were deemed too outlandish, even for Fable. Dean Carter points to the legendary Demon Foot boss as a classic example. It was a boss battle in a huge, foggy wilderness. You knew something big was hunting you, but you could never actually see it, not until a massive 50-foot hoof stomped down into the environment, trying to squash you flat. It was kinda like Monty Python meets The Exorcist. Sadly, our big hoofy friend never made it in. One other beloved creation that failed to make the final cut was Trogdor, the decidingly unfriendly dragon. Not to be confused with Jack of Blade's final form in The Lost Chapters. This scaly behemoth patrolled the skies of Albion, raining its fiery vengeance on anyone foolish enough to stand in its shadow. As Alan Harding fondly recalls, unfortunately the dragon was cut, as we didn't have time left to make it fun to fight. But man, it looked awesome, strafing the hero from above while burning through the countryside. Some things you may have noticed about these excerpts is how they state that plenty of other interesting creatures were planned as bosses for the game, such as a giant demon foot that would apparently chase you through a foggy wilderness. No idea what someone was smoking when they came up with that one, but interestingly enough, it appears that the dragon was also meant to chase you throughout a countryside, and that it actually had a name, which was Trogdor. The whole countryside thing would explain a lot about why certain concept art look the way they do, like Dragon B, which seemed to be grabbing onto trees and killing villagers. Though this doesn't say exactly where you would have found the dragon, perhaps this countryside is referring to this old piece of concept art where Hook Coast didn't really have any snow. I guess that could be considered a countryside. I'm not too sure, but according to Alan Hardy's description, it appears the dragon wasn't meant to be originally found in a castle. However, that could just be me interpreting this information wrong. So as always, I do admit that I could be wrong about this, even though the information does support it. I just thought I should bring up this possibility and let you decide for yourself. But to me, this genuinely does sound like an earlier concept to Dragon's Lair. This could also be supported by voice lines which can be found in the game that have text entries which refer to the dragon fight. From the sounds of things, these villagers are warning you about a creature terrorizing Hook Coast. Since they aren't involved with the quest itself, there is unfortunately not a lot more that is known about how the storyline involving these voice lines would have played out.
You should get to Hook Coast! Something's wrong over at Hook Coast.
Hook Coast! You must get to Hook Coast!
Run to Hook Coast. You can stop things.
There is something wrong at Hook Coast.
Strange beings have been seen heading there.
You won't catch me going up to Hook Coast. Not never again.
Run! Save yourself! Hook Coast is getting destroyed!
The world's coming to an end!
The time is approaching. Hell is coming to Hook Coast!
Once this place was peaceful. Now it's being torn apart.
Hook Coast isn't a safe place to be. Flee while you have the chance.
Albion's being ripped up. Lights and noises at the Abbey.
So what about Trogdor? Why does the dragon have such an unusual name if it's not Kyris? Well, believe it or not, but Trogdor is actually a reference to a joke that was made by a content creator and animator from the same time period called Strong Bad. The creator had a series called Strong Bad Email that was hosted on the Homestar Runner website, and it quickly became one of their most popular features for the site back in the early 2000s. In one of the emails, Strong Bad was asked by a fan to show his skills as an artist, and thought that the best way to approach this would be to draw a dragon, which ended up becoming the name for the episode. Jokingly, he made the dragon look S-shaped and quite simplistic in its design, but in doing so ended up creating an internet legacy around it.
Oh, you're gonna love this one. Again with the email. Every week I hope that it's from a female. Oh man, it's not from a female. Hey Strongbad, can you draw a dragon? I want to see your skills of an artist. Okay. Well, G2G, Geyser from California. The dragon? That's easy. Feel free to follow along with my simple step-by-step instructions. I make drawing fun. To begin, draw an S for snake. Or dragon. Whatever. Next, we'll draw a more different S. For the head, put a top mark on a long V. Then you add some legs, throw on a couple of arms, and... Whoa. Wait a minute. I think I need to start over. This thing doesn't look natural. Okay, starting again, the same way. S, more different S. Close it up real good at the top for his head, and then, using consummate V's, give him teeth, spinities, and angry eyebrows. And you can add smoke or fire, or maybe some wings. You know, if he's a wingaling dragon. Let's put one of those beefy arms back on him for good measure. That looks really good. Coming out of the back of his neck there. Now he needs a name. How about... Trogdor, the Burninator. Oh yeah, check out all his majesty. There's my dragon, Kaiser. Let's see how the other students are doing. On your methods.
What? That's not an improvement.
Trogdor strikes again.
Trogdor! Trogdor!
Trogdor was a man. I mean, he was a dragon man. Maybe he was just a dragon. But he was still Trogdor! Trogdor! Burninating the countryside, burninating the peasants, burninating all the people.
As it turns out, the concept of Trogdor ended up becoming more popular than the brother Chaps, who are Matt and Mike Chapman, had ever imagined, and became a sort of inside joke amongst their fans. Once the brothers realised the popularity of Trogdor amongst their fans, they acknowledged this by releasing 2 games based on the dragon concept. This could also help explain why there is a thing entry along with a set of animations for the dragon called Burninate, which is probably another reference to this joke. So if you didn't already know, well, now you know where the name Trogdor actually comes from, and how it could have inspired the developers to name the dragon Trogdor as a sort of inside joke amongst themselves. Now that you know all about Trogdor, the Dragon Cliff map, the trophy for completing it, and the demon door which could have been associated with it, here is a mod that me and Albion Secrets managed to put together using the information that we could find to help give us a general idea of how this Dragon Cliff demon door concept might have played out. At the time, we had just found out about information regarding Hook Coast and the Dragon Boss quest, so we thought it would be a cool idea to add it there so that it doesn't interfere with the rest of the game.
It's you. Your renown has spread. But beware, you have never faced a challenge like this. Seriously. I have contained this threat for 1,000 years. It could kill you where you stand. You may pass. Git.
took us a long time to stitch together by using the Creature Dragon O2 assets and then applying them to Jack of Blades. Unfortunately, as you can see, not all of the triggers for Jack's flying and hovering work well in a place that isn't the intended Archon's Folly. Even after taking those markers from that map and putting them in Dragon Cliff, we've tried doing all sorts of things to fix this issue, but no matter what we do, he always gets temporarily stuck in the boundaries of the map. But it's the best we could do with it for now. I'm just proud I got it to look like it was attacking 2 of the towers, though it is based on RNG, so sometimes it looks like he never bothers with them and sometimes he will just keep attacking them. It's pretty crazy. The only issue with this approach is that now it's pretty hard to attack him with melee. Almost impossible even. That being said, we did make a version that straight up replaces Jack of Blades dragon form with this dragon's model and animations, so if you'd like to experience all of the animations for it in a more cleaner way, then I recommend checking out that mod, which is also by me and Albion Secrets. While we are on the topic of Hook Coast, another thing to consider is the Galleon, otherwise known as the Ship of the Drowned, that grants you access to the Northern Wastes in Fable the Lost Chapters. If we were to view the game files for TLC, we can find even more boats that were intended for Hook Coast. They both share the exact same model, yet they are 2 separate mesh entries, which is really confusing. One is named Hook Coast Ship Large, and the other is named HKC Galleon 01, with HKC being an abbreviation of Hook Coast. There's also a lever for the Hook Coast lighthouse that goes unused and can still be found in the game files. This has led the community to believe that back in the day, the intention of these assets were that you had to find this lever hidden away in some location in Hook Coast's lighthouse to call upon the original Galleon. However, this whole section was cut from the original game for the Xbox back in 2004 and was later brought back for the Lost Chapters. Only this time it's the Fireheart that you use to call upon the boat that sends you there. Unfortunately, there is no hard evidence to prove which one this was intended for, but based on other evidence in the game, it leads us to assume that they were intended for either the Travel to Necropolis quest, which is also a cut quest from the original game, or the dragon boss fight that could have potentially been on a castle with its own map similar to Dragon Cliff. So I thought I would share that bit of information about the Galleon and the lighthouse lever in case it has some form of relevance, but personally I do think that they might have been intended for the Travel to Necropolis quest instead. This version of the Galleon even has a similar mermaid kind of ornament near the bow of the ship, kind of like they were trying to make it look like a pirate ship. There's also this strange texture that can be found inside of it. I'm guessing this part isn't supposed to be seen. And then you have the lever. What's strange is a lot of the levers use this exact same model, even though it's clearly a one that's intended for Hook Coast. But it appears that there was one missing from Hob Cave, the Hanging Tree, and the Hook Coast Lighthouse that the hero could have possibly used. Our last subject to discuss in regards to this video involves going back to the Dragon Cliff map on the Xbox version of the game. If we check the TNG for the map, which is the text file that references all of the objects and markers which are placed in a certain map, then search for the phrase chest, we will find a certain marker that can be found here called Dragon Chest Pos, which I'm guessing means Dragon Chest Position, that appears to trigger near the entrance of the level. Unfortunately, we have no way of triggering this particular marker, since the scripts associated with it were most likely removed from Fable TLC, or replaced with the ones that are used for Jack of Blades. But based on the name, it gives us the assumption that once the dragon was killed, the camera would pan to this chest, which will appear out of nowhere. The rewards you would receive are unknown, since it's not like we can access the chest itself, but the items which are believed to be found in this chest are the Dragon Scale Trophy and possibly the legendary pump action crossbow known as the Harvester. That finally covers all the information I could find relating to Dragon Cliff and Trogdor. At some point I might see about making an extra video to go alongside this one, which will try its best to take all this information that is shown here and put it into some sort of timeline, similar to the one I had shown earlier in the video. I planned to do it here as a sort of conclusion, but I think this video is already long enough. Hopefully you enjoyed your time watching this video. It took a lot longer to make than I was hoping for, but more things kept surfacing and I knew I had to include them. If you would like to see any more of my Fable TLC cut content videos, then a playlist can be found in the video description. All necessary links to sources outside of the game should also be found in the description if you would like to visit any of them for yourself. If you know of any of the cut content, mods, or glitches that I should cover on the channel, then feel free to leave me a comment below, or join my Discord server where like-minded people talk about topics such as these for Fable the Lost Chapters, and sometimes other games if I ever get round to that.